Rosemary Davis was looking through the file of one of the inmates yet again. She grew only more convinced that she made the right choice. Rachel Parker was the perfect fit for what the prison warden had in mind. Rachel was a young woman who got convicted on the charges of fraud for selling stolen goods, and in the 2 years she already spent in prison, she only showed herself from the best side. Rachel wasn't seen spending time with hardened criminals and didn't seem eager to join their ranks in the future. The young inmate simply wanted to serve her time and get out as soon as possible. Rachel seemed to be best fit for what Rosemary wanted to do. The warden looked at the picture in the young inmate's file once again. "I hope you won't let me down, little Rachel," Rosemary whispered and closed the file. She had been in charge of the woman's prison for the past 7 years and was accustomed to unquestioning obedience from employees and convicts alike. Unfortunately, being successful at her job didn't mean that her life was just as great outside the prison walls. Few people knew that Rosemary's main problem had always been the fact that she couldn't have children. This issue had always caused her many unpleasant moments in her life. Rosemary was married twice, and both times the main reason for the divorce was her inability to have children. Neither one of her ex-husbands wanted to spend their lives with a woman who couldn't give them kids. And only Michael Donahue didn't seem to care about this fact. He'd been living with Rosemary Davis for 10 years now. Unlike the others, he treated his wife with love and understanding. Michael didn't focus on the fact that Rosemary couldn't have kids and was ready to spend the rest of his life with her. Moreover, he didn't mind his wife's rather unconventional job either, even though she spent most of her time within the walls of the women's prison. Michael lived through a rather painful experience of an unsuccessful relationship in his youth. So he learned to appreciate the good things he got in life. But Rosemary had a different take on their situation, and more than anything else in the world, she wanted to give her husband children. Of course, for obvious reasons, there was no way for her to get pregnant. Therefore, in order to give her husband a child, Rosemary decided to resort to the services of a surrogate mother, whom she prudently selected from the young inmates. Being the prison warden, Rosemary had access to the personal files of all the inmates, some of whom were in there by mistake and weren't really criminals. And Rachel Parker was one of those. It was this young woman that Rosemary had chosen. First of all, the woman shared her thoughts with her husband. "Honey, I finally found a suitable candidate. You just have to talk to this woman in person and give me your approval." Michael raised his eyebrow in surprise and smiled. In the depths of his soul, he didn't believe in the successful outcome of this venture, but he didn't want to upset his wife and treated her idea with due attention. "Okay, I'd love to talk to this woman. I hope she won't mind," Michael added. Hearing her husband's response, Rosemary breathed a sigh of relief. She spent so much time looking for a suitable candidate that she didn't want her plan to fall through at the most crucial moment. Rosemary deliberately talked to Rachel in advance in order to prepare her for her proposal. The warden knew from experience that women like Rachel Parker ended up behind bars by pure chance, and given the opportunity to get out early, they could very well start a new life. The next day, Rosemary and Michael went to the prison together. The woman planned to ask Rachel in her office, which seemed like the best place to have this conversation with her. "Take a seat, dear. I'll get the guard to bring in the inmate." Rosemary turned to her husband. It was Michael's first time in his wife's office, and therefore he looked around with interest, checking out the signs and schedules hanging on the walls. However, having heard his wife's request, the man obediently sat down on a chair and started waiting for the arrival of the young inmate. As the guard escorted Rachel down the hallways, the poor young woman tried to find the answers to the question that was bothering her. Why would the warden want to see me? Am I getting released early? Or maybe not. Are they going to add more time to my sentence for some misconduct, which I don't even know about? The woman thought anxiously, trying to keep up with the guard. Finally, the guard stopped in front of the office with the brown door and gestured for the inmate to go in. Rachel plucked up her courage and, pulling the handle towards her, stepped into the office. Seeing the inmate, Rosemary Davis got up from her table and came closer. "It's good to see you, Rachel. Take a seat, please. My husband Michael and I have a couple of questions for you," the warden said cordially. Only now did Rachel turn around and see a man of about 45 with gray hair at the temples and a hint of sadness in his eyes sitting in the corner of the office. "Yes, ma'am, I understand," Rachel answered evasively, even though she had no clue what they were going to talk about. Rosemary adjusted the collar of her shirt out of habit and was about to begin her speech when suddenly her husband got up from his chair and walked over to Rachel. The warden watched in surprise as her husband moved close to the young inmate and carefully touched the small pendant hanging on her neck. "Excuse me, miss, but where did you get this little thing?" Michael asked, having a hard time keeping his emotions in check. Rachel seemed embarrassed by his question and blushed to the very roots of her hair. "This pendant used to belong to my mother. She died 5 years ago. It has her picture inside. I always wear it," Rachel replied. Rosemary looked carefully into her husband's face and immediately noticed that he was unusually pale. "What's the matter, dear? Are you feeling all right?" the warden asked. But Michael had already come to his senses and shook his head. "I'm fine, Rosemary. It's just that I've seen this pendant before," the man replied. Rachel looked at the warden in surprise and then at her husband. "Did you know my mother?" the woman whispered, having a hard time holding back her tears. Michael sighed sadly and nodded. "I bought this very pendant for Miranda Parker 20 years ago. There's a place for a picture inside, and it has an inscription on the back," the man added. Now it was Rosemary's turn to be surprised. To her deep regret, the woman only now realized that she knew virtually nothing about her husband's past. They met over 10 years ago and had been living together ever since, but they never asked each other uncomfortable questions about their past. And now it turned out that Michael knew the mother of Rosemary's inmate, Rachel Parker. Understanding the absurdity of the situation, Rosemary accepted the fact that the question of the surrogacy was definitely off the table. Meanwhile, Michael sat down across from Rachel and started his story. The young woman interrupted him from time to time, adding details, which Michael simply couldn't have known. He met Miranda Parker when he was a senior in college. Michael immediately noticed the lovely brown-haired woman who transferred to their university from another city. Their relationship developed quickly, and a couple of months later, it was already much more than just a friendship. It was then that Michael gave Miranda that memorable pendant that was now hanging around the neck of the young prisoner. The young people were already thinking about getting married when they had a fight that drove a wedge into their hitherto harmonious relationship. Being a proud and wayward young man, Michael refused to be the one to reconcile, and therefore he waited for Miranda to take the first step. But she was also a proud young woman and left the city a couple of days after the fight. Perhaps it was their youth and lack of experience that were to blame. But be that as it may, Michael found the strength to live on, and just 1 month later, he already got a new girlfriend. Of course, the man couldn't have known that it was at that moment that Miranda would decide to go back to him and try to make up. But instead, she saw him with another woman. Unlike the first fight, this breakup was final. And a month later, Miranda found out that she was pregnant. Feeling betrayed and not wanting to have anything to do with Michael, the woman decided to have the baby and raise her on her own, without turning to Michael for help. Miranda named that baby Rachel, after her late grandmother. Raising Rachel on her own was hard, but the young mother never gave up and did everything she could to ensure her daughter had everything she needed. Unfortunately, having to work so hard had a detrimental effect on Miranda's health. According to Rachel, she died 5 years ago, very upset over the fact that she wouldn't get to see her daughter's wedding. "And what happened then? How did you end up in this prison?" Michael asked, getting more and more agitated. The man already realized that Rachel was most likely his daughter. "And then I met a man named Simon. We dated for several months. I thought that Simon loved me, but he didn't care about me at all. Moreover, Simon had problems with the law. To evade responsibility, he deliberately set me up to take the fall and turned me in to the police. So I ended up in prison, Rachel said with a sad sigh. Michael looked at his daughter and, being unable to contain his feelings, hugged her. Tears welled up in Rosemary's eyes when she realized that she had just witnessed the reunion of a father and a daughter who didn't even know about each other's existence until then. Michael and Rachel were openly crying, knowing full well that if it weren't for their chance encounter, they might have never found each other. Upon learning Rachel's sad story, Rosemary did everything she could to get her case reviewed and get her an early release. After his daughter's release from prison, Michael went to Miranda's grave and asked her for forgiveness. He felt very sorry that his stupidity caused their breakup 20 years ago. Rosemary took this situation with due understanding and did everything to ensure that Michael's daughter had everything she needed. At this point, the couple decided against using a surrogate. Instead, they filled out all the paperwork and went through all the necessary procedures to adopt a child from an orphanage. And now, when children's laughter finally filled the house of Rosemary and Michael, their life shone with new colors, which they simply didn't notice before, being always busy with work. Rachel came to visit her newfound parents on the weekends, confident that her mother was watching them from heaven and rejoicing at their reunion.